some people from this point think like, oh, cool. Now that I can get the code part, I'm going to go build my own SaaS. I'm going to build my own product and ship it and make a bunch of money or whatever. And the funny thing is that like the thing I like to say here is there's a reason why like every software engineer isn't also running their own SaaS product at the same time. And we all know this in like inherently working in product, like there's a lot of other problems to solve, like distribution and getting customers to care about the thing you're shipping and all that other stuff. For a lot of people, I think the technical barriers felt like the biggest barrier, but it's actually just the first barrier. And then you have the sequence of barriers after that. And so anyway, that's not me trying to discourage people from doing it, but just to say that like it's still the same amount of like difficulty to win. You can just try more things faster, but it doesn't really change the game itself.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supra Insider. This time, Mark and I sat down with Colin Matthews. Colin is the instructor of 2 courses on Maven, which is how we met. Colin teaches one course around AI prototyping for product managers, and then he teaches another course on technical foundations for product managers. Colin left his full-time job at the end of last year to focus full-time on teaching, which is incredible. And he has become my go-to person for all of my dumb questions about AI prototyping tools. Colin's an absolute expert on these things. And before this, he's been a product manager for many years. And he's got a very technical background, but simplifies concepts in a way that anyone who doesn't have a technical background like myself can really understand. In the conversation, we went deep on the landscape of AI prototyping tools from the lowest level of sophistication all the way to the most complex ones, and who each of those is really ideal for. We talked about when to use and not use AI prototyping tools. Then we did a really deep screen share demo where Colin walked us through an example of how we would potentially add a new feature into LinkedIn's post impressions page, which is something that if you post a lot on LinkedIn, you might be looking at. And then we talked about really where the future of these tools is taking us. Like, what is the implications of, or what are the implications of the introduction of these AI-powered prototyping tools to the way that product managers and designers and engineers work together, in really why the most important thing is going to be continuing to talk to users. With no further ado, I'll let you enjoy this conversation with Colin Matthews. Thank you. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Follow us on Substack. Give us a rating. It'll help us a ton and help future people discover us while also making sure you never miss an episode. Thank you. All right, we're live. Colin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, recently Mark and I recorded our 40th episode where we just did a bunch of reflections on the podcast so far. And one of our goals that we share for this year is to stay at the cutting edge of a lot of these new AI tools that are being built, AI agents, AI co-pilots. And of course, we need to stay on top of what's going on with AI-powered prototyping tools. And you seem to be the person that I am seeing the most in this space right now that really is, you've got your hands right up in that category of AI prototyping tools. So we're just really excited to go deep with you.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely spending a lot of time on it nowadays. So happy to chat about it.
Yeah. So where I'd like to start this conversation is who and when should they use AI prototyping tools? And is there a group of people that you're seeing start to explore these tools that should probably avoid them, and people that maybe should be exploring these tools that are not yet using them when you think they should?
Yeah, and maybe even taking like a step back to like what I'm curious is like maybe like paint as the landscape for us, right? Because I think like some people like are familiar with the chatbots, people are familiar with maybe like the IDEs like Cursor, Replit, Bolt. So I think maybe just like first like painting like here's what's out there and how I think about the different players.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so AI prototyping, just to define it quickly, just in case people aren't familiar with it, it's basically using these AI tools to write code for you, to quickly build something that's functional, serves some purpose in terms of testing an idea or something like that. You might think about like ChatGPT in this context. If you ever ask ChatGPT a question and it writes code in response, like that might seem like what we're talking about. It's a step further than that. It's not just asking it to write code for you. It's typically also taking that code, running it for you, giving you a way to easily deploy it to a website, share that with a user. It's like a bundling of tools where it's like both the writing of the code part, as well as all of the other steps you need to do to actually get that to be useful, right? And yeah, there's a ton of different tools in the space already, different ways people are tackling it in terms of their approach. Some of them are like more technical. They give you more control. Like you can really build anything you want. It's just like an AI layer on top. Some of them are way less control. So like you can't even see the code, for example, which you might think is a pro or a con. And so, yeah, different ways of kind of handling that problem and different use cases there. But yeah, we can either hop into like overall, like the types first or the specific players in terms of companies. Maybe the types would be helpful just to orient people before I get into like the names of the companies.
Yeah,
Please.
that'd be really helpful.
Cool. Okay, yeah. I guess the super basic ones are like Claude and ChatGPT. Actually, ChatGPT literally, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, released a feature where you can run basic web apps in the canvas. So if you ask ChatGPT to make a web app for you, can actually render the results. But Claude's had that for a while. I'm sure you've seen that before if you've tried it, where like it'll create an artifact in Claude and show you like a chart or some cards or whatever it is that you're asking it for. So that's like the most basic version, is a single little quick thing that you can see. It really isn't like a prototype most of the time, and you can't do that much with it. And those ones are limited by both the tools they can use. So we'll talk a little bit about like how these tools themselves, the AI tools, install other things to make things faster, and also the number of like files they can run. So it's like extremely small. If you want to make a very basic to-do app or like quickly visualize some data, something like that, then you can use ChatGPT or Claude to do that. The kind of category after that is what I'm calling cloud development environments. So this is things like Replit or Lovable or Bolt or V0. So these are one step further. They're going to write the code for you. It's going to be multiple different files. They can technically build like production applications if you wanted to, but you don't need to know what to do with the code. That environment is going to handle the results for you. So when you get some code back, it's going to update it, it's going to run it, deploy it for you. And then the last set is an actual, what a developer would use, an IDE, or basically something to write and run code in on your local computer. So that's like Cursor, the most popular one, but VS Code in GitHub Copilot. It's actually maybe not equally popular, but like different use case. That's more enterprise focusing typically. But yeah, that's the third way to start using AI with prototyping, is to try to run on your own. Again, you have to know how to do that though, right? So you have to set up your computer to run the code. You have to know how to like handle everything on your own, which is more challenging for most people.
So when I think of the different kind of groups of people who are starting to experiment with these tools, I'm guessing there's probably a category of tool that generally is the best fit for almost like different groups. So maybe if there's like, I'm imagining the least technical, like a super go-to-market minded person who's maybe never written code, doesn't really understand anything. Is there like a category of tool that is best for them, which is the one that just hides the code altogether?
Yeah, it basically moves along that axis that we just talked through. So if it's like super simple, you just want to create something that's like a quick visualization, Claude or ChatGPT is great for that. When you actually want to build something that looks like a prototype or a functional application, you kind of like within that middle section have its own little like grid. So I'd say Lovable, which is one of the products, is on the far left of that, which is doesn't show you the code. Basically, it's intended for non-technical users more so than technical users. And then Replit is on the far other side, which is basically Replit, in case you weren't familiar, was actually built as a tool for developers. And then the AI agent stuff came out and they slapped the AI agent on top, and now you can write code with AI. But behind the scenes, it still has all the developer tooling that you'd want. And so it's the most kind of technical or complex. And then Bolt and V0 I put right in the middle in terms of like the other popular ones in terms of complexity and those trade-offs there.
And I think the other way I would think about it too is like, what are you trying to do with the app and the scale that you're trying to do with it? Because I think like with Replit, you can actually deploy it. Like they have a pretty solid infrastructure versus maybe, I don't know, like Lovable or even ChatGPT. Like maybe you can share your link, but you won't have a database or anything that can sustain your data there.
Yeah, exactly. This is like the most critical decision in terms of which tool to use, which is what are you trying to accomplish? And specifically, when you talk about the prototype, like which components of the prototype are you trying to build? So just again, in case folks aren't familiar, like any kind of basic web app, you're going to have a client, a server, and a database, right? So the client's what the user sees, server receives requests from the client and performs actions, and the database stores your data. For most basic prototyping, so we're talking about like designers and PMs and stuff like that, and you want to prototype your existing application, test out some new ideas, you really have no reason to have a server or a database, right? Like you don't need to store data. You don't really need to do anything other than have something visual to show. And so just prototyping the client is a great idea. And so maybe like you don't necessarily need to go over to Replit in order to do that. You can accomplish that with one of the other tools we mentioned. Whereas if you want to build like a little internal tool that's actually functional, then yeah, okay, you're probably gonna need a server and a database to handle some of that stuff, some of the integrations, storing data, authentication, whatever it might be. And so yeah, moving over to Replit or hooking up a database makes a lot of sense.
I think the other thing to think about too, which for me, it's something that I'm watching, is like also the cost of prototyping something. Like as someone who has like already like 15 like AI subscriptions, right? Like the different tools will also lead to a lot of different costs, right? Like probably like Replit, you have to pay like a base subscription, and then depending on the pull requests, so like you also get charged for modifications almost. So you can actually, a prototype can easily get very close to $100 versus like maybe the other. I'm actually not as familiar with the business model for the other tools, but is that, yeah, how do you think about like the cost to prototype as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, there's that base fee. So my general recommendation for all this is like find one that you like for the use case that you have and stick with it. Because one thing is that like when it runs into errors, people sometimes have a tendency to switch. Like, oh man, Bolt sucks at doing this thing. I'm going to use Replit instead. And it turns out that it's just like they all make mistakes, and it's just they make mistakes at different points sometimes. So just pick one and stick with it. And then yeah, they're all like $20 to $25 a month. So subscribing to all of them is also a pretty expensive endeavor. In terms of usage, most of them actually don't follow the Replit model in terms of like charging you per request. They give you a fixed number of tokens or messages. And it's relatively generous, I think, for most things. Like in a month, I think Lovable's the base tier is like 100 messages. Bolt's probably somewhere similar in terms of token usage, but you can do actually a lot with that, especially when you get better at using the tools. You can get a lot done with that.
Yeah, I'm curious if, because you coach people, you teach courses around this, so I'm sure you're serving a wide spectrum of savviness and sophistication in people. Is there like a graduation motion that you've observed, where people maybe start with a tool like Lovable and work their way towards more tools like Replit, or do you find that people can stay with the tool even as they get more comfortable and familiar with what's possible in it?
Yeah, I found most people end up using like one other tool, so let's say Bolt, Lovable, or V0, whichever one their preference is, and then Replit. Not for the same prototypes, for different use cases. For Replit, they're basically using it for building their own apps, like things that they want to share with people, like their own little mini application. And then for prototyping, it's typically one of the other ones. Personally, I like having the most control over the tool. So right now, Bolt is my preference, simply because I find it gives you more customization. The other ones, like the agents, kind of have their own quirks or personalities that are baked in. And so if you stick with what they want to do, it works great. And if you try to move away from that, sometimes it doesn't work as well. So anyway, there's different like configurations, different setups, different kind of trade-offs. But a lot of that is also personal preference, like in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. A good example of this is like V0 has some default styling that some people really like, and maybe other people don't.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question and yeah, I also want to get to the demo next, but yeah, I think Ben and I have talked about this topic before. Like, what are some important like attributes or skills that you need to master in this age of AI? And I think especially now that building is becoming cheaper and cheaper, I think one is of course like being able to think first principles and really be creative. And we actually had a discussion whether that actually might be as important, but I still think that being able to think clearly is very important here. I think the other one is taste, right? If everyone is able to prototype, right, like you need to have a really good intuition of what's good design, what's bad design. And then maybe the next one is, if it's so easy to build apps, like actually the person that wins is the one that is able to master distribution and get the most amount of eyeballs and people to actually buy their products. I'm curious, given that prototype is so tightly coupled with taste, do you feel like any of these tools actually has better taste than others? And you mentioned that the V0 maybe had like their own styling, which might be their way of imposing their taste. But like, if I'm like, hey, I just want the tool that's going to give me the sexiest designs, is there one that comes to mind here?
Yeah, definitely V0 out of the set. I've found that V0 does the best job of just like default styling. It always looks good. And then I would find Replit personally the hardest one to get to look the way that I want things to look, or just the decisions that it makes if you're not specific about styling. It doesn't really seem to care, which is a weird thing to say about an AI, an AI coding tool. But like the other ones seem to care more, let's say, if we want to use that word, about styling. Whereas Replit seems to be more focused on functionality. And part of the reason for this, what I think, is that behind the hood, they're all using Sonnet 3.5 from Anthropic. That's like the best coding model right now. And there's like, you can talk about reasoning models and other models and stuff like that, but generally that's the one that they're all using behind the scenes. And so they all have the same challenges, which is how much information can I give to Sonnet, and how can I effectively use the information that it gives me back when it returns code. Part of the reason why I recommend picking the right tool and like focusing on just client if you want to do prototyping is that you're minimizing the complexity, and you're also minimizing the context in terms of like literally the number of files that have to go back and forth between you and Sonnet. And so I think it's actually easier for tools that aren't handling client server database like Replit, or let's say just more complex stacks, to do things like have better styling, because they're just entirely focused on the front end. So like more tokens, more thinking, quote unquote, can go back and forth with that context versus by default, Replit has more to handle. So that's just a hypothesis, by the way. I do know they're using Sonnet. And that's why I think that it's better. And also I think the developers of those tools have spent more time trying to make it better.
Yeah, and before we get into the demo, which I'm also really excited about, the one player or the category of player, which has really maybe just become Figma at this point, but like the design tools in the space, we haven't really talked about them. What are you seeing and how people are potentially going from Figma to AI powered prototype? Are there any common kind of like workflows that are starting to really emerge as like the gold standard?
Yeah, I think it's still pretty new, to be honest. A good example of this is if you Google this, you'll probably find it. There's a company called Builder.io that just released a tool, I think it was about 2 weeks ago as well, to do this. Figma to AI prototype. They partnered with Lovable as like a first party integration, but you can pull it out and put it wherever you want. That came out 2 weeks ago. Figma doesn't currently have any supported first party tooling to help with this type of problem. I think it's going to change a lot over the next 6 months to see what workflow ends up being the one that sticks. I personally wouldn't be surprised. Maybe we can look back at this and see if it's true. I wouldn't be surprised if Figma comes out with something in relation to this space, because there's 2 reasons why. So like Figma obviously has its place, and I think that's not going to change in terms of maintaining your design system. Like Airbnb doesn't want to just get some random AI prototype's opinion on its design. So having your designers have a space to express that is important. The challenge with Figma is, one, I'm sure you guys have done this before, it's not easy to use. Like it is not a user-friendly tool unless you're really good at it. And then for PMs specifically, if you want to test an idea, it can be hard to do that in Figma and then get it in front of a user. And like you feel like you've done a good enough job of representing your idea because the tool is difficult to use. And so I think that there is like this space for something that's like a little bit lighter weight, expressing your ideas from your Figma designs, maintaining your design systems, getting in front of users, and like testing those ideas prior to building them, where like really this idea fits in. I mean, honestly, I hope Figma does something in this space, because I think it would probably do a better job at this than whatever workarounds exist over the next while, right?
Yeah. It almost feels like V0 should have been like what Figma AI should have been almost,
Yeah,
right? Like I think that would have been like the obvious, or maybe now in hindsight. Yeah, I think Figma is in a really interesting spot, right? I think like their edge right now is that they have, as you said, like a lot of these companies are pod committed, right? They have all these huge design systems that they spent years building, right? That these tools are not heavy weight enough to move them there. But yeah, I think there's all these other use cases, right? Like even just building a prototype from Figma designs like that. I remember like I work with designers that takes them like 3-4 hours. There's no reason why that should take that long anymore. So I think there's an opportunity there for them to make that a lot easier, and maybe even like empowering non-designers to make changes. And then the other thing that I think they have a really interesting mode that I don't know how they do it is like the training data, right? Like they probably have some of the most probably talented design teams using Figma. So maybe there's any patterns that they can use. I don't know how that would work to then inspire future designs. I think that could also be a really interesting offering for people.
They had to shut that off, didn't they? They turned that on after the last config. They turned on the ability to like just type into a text box, like I want to design a weather app, and it created a weather app that looked exactly like Apple weather. And I think it raised this like really big ethical question for people, which is, hey, hold on, if I'm using Figma for my designs, am I giving them license to use my content for like generative design? What if we come up with patterns that we don't want other people to know about? Do I have to like toggle that off somewhere? So I think they turned that off.
Yeah, to me that's very silly. And I think that's actually like a good segue into the demo. Like a lot of how people are using these prototype tools, they're literally just taking screenshots of existing apps, right? So like unless you're planning on never launching your designs, like people can already do that. So like I don't know if there's any like good reason to do that. Like I get the concern, but at the same time is you can already do this in the wild. So might as well like kind of help, I don't know, the design world get better and play a contribution there, and maybe get rewarded for it, or maybe you can get credit. Hey, like I influenced that design, and
That would be great.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, should we jump into the prototype?
Yeah,
I'm really
I just
excited.
have one more thing to add on that topic,
Yeah.
just because
Yeah.
I think there's parallels to this that have already happened, which is patenting software, right? There's a reason why we don't patent software. Companies don't patent software. It's just because like the speed of change is faster than like the value of your patent. So like, if you go patent something, like 6 months later, their patent has no value anymore, because the one is like you can re-implement the same thing in a different way in software all the time. So like the patent doesn't really hold value. And two, even if you couldn't, like the ideas change so quickly that it doesn't really matter. In this context, like for design, like I really hope that designers are going and looking at like Airbnb and trying to figure out like why is it good? That's part of your job, is to understand what good practice is. And so how is this any really different? Like it's just faster. So yeah, I don't see this really holding up for a long time. The idea that somehow this is bad or worse, because it's to me just faster. But anyway, I guess we'll see how it goes over time. But
Yeah, let's
anyway.
get. So before you screen share, you want to give us like the
Sure.
high level overview of what you have planned for us with the demo?
Yeah, basically I'm going to screen share and walk through prototyping a new feature into LinkedIn Analytics. I just picked that because everyone's probably familiar with LinkedIn and the views there and all that stuff. And so we're going to start with a little bit of a walkthrough of what I've done so far, because I did a bit of prep work to save us some time. And then I will walk through building something new on top of it. And then we'll take a look at some other kind of integrations or things we can add on top that makes, I think, AI prototyping very unique as compared to Figma or other design systems or ways of doing prototyping. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll throw in like an AI feature on there as well, so we can test that out.
Awesome. And just so the audience knows, we know a bunch of you are just listening on audio, so we'll do our best to narrate on top of what we're looking at in case you're not able to look at the screen. And I'm really excited. So yeah, Colin, feel free to get started whenever you're ready.
Yeah,
I'll just say too that, but if you are close to a computer and want to open YouTube, we have a great channel. And if you're already there, just hit subscribe too. We'll really appreciate it.
We do video on Spotify now too. Quick plug.
Perfect. All right, you guys can see the screen. We're good to go here, right?
Yes, I see bolt.new in your URL, and there's this whole URL, and I'm looking at what looks like a deployment environment of some kind.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just chat through what Bolt is really quick, and then we can talk about the specific design that I have here. Bolt is one of the tools that we mentioned. There's most similar to V0 or Lovable. I group those three together in terms of the functionality. And basically what you do is you put in a prompt and it writes some code for you. So maybe just for the folks who are watching, in case they've literally never seen this before, I'll just open up a new tab and we'll just do something really quick, like make me a to-do app. And this will give you a good sense of what Bolt is before we dive into the work that I've done so far. So basically you ask for something. I have some actually custom config here that writes me a PRD before it implements it. This is not what Bolt would do if you went and did it right now. We can talk about some of that config later on if you want. But it basically asks me to create a plan and then execute on the plan. So I'll just tell it to continue, and it'll execute on our plan for us. And I'll talk about a bit of why that config is set up maybe a little bit later on. And then it writes code. This is not prototyping like you're dragging stuff around on a canvas like Figma. It's writing code. In order for you to make changes or increment over time with your ideas here, you're just going to continue to write text inside the left-hand side and just keep going from there. A great example, we got a little error here. I'll talk about errors and debugging later on. I'm just going to click attempt fix for now. Hopefully that resolves it for us. But this is another common occurrence, is you're going to get problems all the way along. And so you have to have some ideas about how to fix that. But anyway, now we have our basic to-do app. We'll test it. I actually don't know if it works. Let's see. Yeah, works reasonably well. You can add it, delete it, so on. So that's Bolt. Each of the different tools is basically the same thing. Like the UI is going to look different. What it can do can be different, but it's going to be a chat box on the left-hand side, your application on the right-hand side, and you continue to make changes using just natural language or text.
And is this at a point where I could just paste the link or take a link somewhere and share it with someone, or is there a step that you need to still make to deploy?
Yeah, just that deploy step in the top right-hand corner. Again, this is one of the benefits we talked a little bit about at the beginning of using something like Bolt or Replit or V0 or Lovable, is rather than if I go ask ChatGPT to make me a to-do app, it could also do the same thing. But then how do I share it? What do I do? Not a lot of good options. If I just click deploy, it'll give me a link deployed to the internet. And that's now like a permanent link that, until I turn it off, will exist forever.
Nice.
So things like buying a domain name, setting up like servers, hosting, no, people don't have to worry about any of that stuff. They've just streamlined it literally into a one-stop shop.
Yeah, I would say all that setup you can do within the tool. Again, to go back a little bit, like if you want a database or a server, then you have to pick the right tool for the job. But outside of that, it's pretty simple. If you did want to have a domain name list as like colinstodos.com or something, I'd still buy that domain and then hook it up. But again, these tools give you basically the configuration you need to hook up a custom domain.
Love
So
it.
you
So
can
cool.
do all those different things inside the tool.
Cool. So what we decided is just a quick demo of like a chat prompt that creates a very simple app, like a full stack app.
Yeah. This one, this is going to be client side only at the moment, so there's no server or database. It can basically handle this content here. It's not going to save this. If I tried to come back to this website later, my to-dos would be gone because I'm not saving them anywhere.
Makes sense. Cool. This is great.
Cool. So yeah, we'll hop back over to our example. So this is an example of the LinkedIn Analytics tab. And if I hop back over to LinkedIn for a second, these are my analytics. As you can see, my impressions are not doing so hot right now, but that's okay. I don't pay too much attention to that, to be honest. But anyway, this is the analytics tool. So what we're going to be prototyping is basically this view into looking at the actual specific analytics over some period of time. And then we'll add an AI feature on top of that. And in terms of what we have so far, I mean, it's basically that first view there, right? So I don't know what you guys think, but like for a prototype, this looks pretty similar. It's obviously not one-to-one the same, but yeah, curious if you guys have any initial thoughts before I
So so what we're looking at is similar to the environment for the to-do app, but on the left side, Colin did already some pre-work. And so what we see on the right side of the screen is a previewed version of a front-end app that took a screenshot that Colin shared and turned it into a clickable app. Is that right, Colin?
Yeah, exactly. So you can see my first prompt here, I included a screenshot, right? And then I just asked Bolt to match that design for me.
Yeah, it looks like the icons look a little bit off, but and maybe like the width, the height is a little bit higher, but overall, like all the core elements are there, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'll just, I guess, chime in on a more meta thing here or an idea. I think if you're doing prototyping and you want to match it like literally one for one, you're going to spend a very long time trying to do that. So for the purpose of testing ideas, I wouldn't bother. If you really want to, like you can put the time and effort in to make it look more like your actual application. But yeah, you're always going to have some small differences unless you really put a lot of time into trying to get it to look exactly the same.
Yeah, and maybe to connect it back to what we're talking about Figma, that's probably going to be one of the advantages of using Figma, right? Of that you're actually going to get like that exact like carbon copy of what you're doing versus when you're taking a screenshot is converting an image into like a front end code, which it's harder to do one by one.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like stuff like, your colors and your spacing and your fonts, like it's going to pick a font that's similar, but lots of companies have their own custom fonts. Even you're not going to get your own custom font in here as well. But yeah.
Yeah, and maybe before we move forward too, I think the reason why I'm excited about this demo is twofold. I think the use cases why I think people should care about this demo is one, I think there's basically two use cases that I hear very often. One is actually people who are interviewing, right? And want to actually share, hey, here's what I would do differently with my app. Like that's actually a question that I've gotten a lot. Be like, hey, I want to show how I would modify this feature. And actually, that's a great way to go back to your hiring team and be like, hey, I made this change based on what I've heard in the interviews. And that's a really cool way to do that. And then I think the other one is, let's say you want to showcase a feature to your design team or engineering team, be actually like, here's what I had in mind versus what you had. That's also another great way to do it. So I think that's a really useful tool for product leaders, for PMs to have in their kind of, in repertoire.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the communication one is huge. Like internal communication with engineers, you basically can walk through the workflow, your design team if you have an idea about like how something should work or look. And then also, honestly, customers, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about that one later, but like you can spin up a quick prototype, either book a call with the customer and walk them through it, have them test it, or just send them the link and have them try it out and get feedback on your ideas that way as well. Yeah, cool. So I'll run through a couple of the things that I've done so far. So I started with asking Bolt to create a design system and a plan. This is a general recommendation, and I'll get into some best practices as we go along, but it's almost always a good idea to ask Bolt or whatever tool to create a plan first before you actually implement. It just does a better job. You obviously could just give it this context to yourself. Like if you had decided ahead of time, these are the exact colors I want and so on, that's fine as well. But I think part of the point hopefully we get across here is that you don't necessarily need to be super technical or be an expert to get like these types of results. You just need to know how to use the tool. And one of the best strategies is when you're not sure about something, just ask the tool like, hey, I have this problem. How would you fix that? Or, hey, I want to do this thing. Make a plan to help me do that. Rather than being like, just fix it or something like we're not giving it really, I guess, time to quote unquote think. giving it time to think, you typically get better results. But yeah, so you can see we have that design system output here in terms of our colors, spacing, fonts, styles, all that stuff. I ask it to get started in terms of implementation, and then it runs through like the basic layout and so on. So you can see a lot of what I'm doing here is actually just, it prompts me, actually. It's reversed the way I have it set up. So it's, hey, I did this thing. Do you want me to continue with this other next step? And I say yes, and also add the nav bar. And so I'm basically just putting together the components of it on the left-hand side here. This is another strategy that I use pretty often that I call reflection. This is also just like chain of thought in terms of models, which is giving them, again, that time to think. So I asked it to, I said, please review your implementation. How can we make it better match the design? And you can see it actually comes back with a list of things that I can do better to match the design more closely. So I'm not telling it like, hey, you did a bad job of this thing. I'm just saying, hey, how can you do better? So again, that general recommendation of like, use the chat as a method of thinking rather than just you doing all the thinking and telling it like, hey, change the font, change the color, change to whatever. Just ask it to make it better through these types of strategies here.
And Colin, just to like level set expectations for a savvy user like yourself, like how long did it take you from that very first prompt in the screenshot to the point where we're about to start our demo where we add on top of this? Like how long do you think that takes?
Yeah, I think it's probably like 10, 15 minutes in total. And that's a lot of that is just honestly refining the design. If you don't care too much about the design or you're building something new, like the to-do app, then it's probably 5 minutes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm guessing the cool thing about that too is that it's not throwaway work, right? Like if you want to continue to modify it, there's probably something you can do to export that, right? And protect it as here's the base kind of design that we're going to be working with all the time. And then you just start from that point rather than having to start over.
Yeah, so all the tools have a function. They all name it different things, but it's basically creating a copy of a design. And so what you could do from this point, actually, maybe I'll just walk through it, is you can create a copy before you continue to iterate. And then you can just reuse that initial baseline over and over again for all your different features, rather than re-implementing that baseline.
So it's like forking?
It is exactly forking. Yeah, okay. So if we click export, on this one, they don't have a button for it like right here for some reason. I kind of wish they would fix that. But if you open it over in, just the button literally says open in StackBlitz. By the way, for anyone listening, StackBlitz is just the name of the company that owns Bolt. So that's how they're related. And then you click the button fork. We have a copy. We open it again. And now we are in our copy. So yeah, it's literally a fork.
It's probably best practice to always do this before you go crazy, right?
Yeah, I'd say like anytime you get to a point where you're happy with the baseline, you should create a copy first before you continue. Simply so that if you mess it up, you don't have to be like, oh, I have to undo a bunch of stuff. That's a bit of a pain.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the analytics and tools page, and we want to, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so we want to prototype our next feature here. So right now, there's really nothing going on here. This isn't really clickable. I mean, you can click on it, obviously, but there's no function happening behind the scenes. And so we're going to try to implement this view here within LinkedIn. So we can see that we have some filters and we have analytics.
And for the people listening, we're basically just going to implement, if you click post impressions, it opens a view with a chart that shows like impressions over time. So yeah, we're going to try to build that view.
We're taking one of those kind of like cards or one of those tiles that's on this page that we've been looking at that we just forked from. And then we want to pretty much emulate what happens when you click into one of those cards for post impressions and then make some updates in that screen. So Colin took a screenshot of what happens today in the live production app when you click into that. And then we're using that as a baseline. And you just typed, can you add this as a new view? This would appear after I click post impressions, make a plan, don't write any code.
Yeah, you got it. And this last part here, make a plan, don't write any code. Again, it's just like following along with the advice I gave earlier, making a plan first. Most of the time in these tools, if you ask a question, they'll respond by writing code. So they think that you're telling it what to do. I'm not telling it what to do. I want it explicitly to not write any code. So that was the plan. And then I'll say, yes. Honestly, I didn't really read what it asked, what it put together. You should read it if you want to be careful and not make mistakes. But I've, I guess, gotten to the point now. I don't know if you guys have heard this new term called vibe coding. But basically, I just do what it tells me to do. And then I fix it if it makes mistakes rather than like really paying attention to what it's doing.
But the cool thing about the make a plan, don't code is that you're probably going to end up in a better state, even if you don't read it and just hit send, that if it had automatically started coding because it took the time to actually think, what am I trying to do? and then it does it basically.
Yeah, exactly. You got it. You could also write that plan if you wanted to, but obviously it's way easier to just ask it to write a plan for you than you writing the plan.
Well, so now it finished. We see the preview again. Oh, I'm sorry. It's still updating.
Yeah, it's still writing the last little bit here. So we'll give it a second. And this is like one kind of odd behavior with Bolt. Sometimes it pops back over to the preview kind of earlier than it should. But so if we click on analytics, we get this little guy here. So not a bad start. I would say not incredibly close to what we asked for in terms of the design, but not terrible.
Yeah, so we're seeing a chart that shows just like an x-axis and a y-axis showing impressions in the y-axis and dates over time, which is exactly what you have in the real product.
Yeah, exactly. And we have some errors on the left-hand side. These are actually irrelevant right now. This is another component of this, which is like knowing a little bit about what the errors are when they matter. The reason I know that this one's irrelevant is that one is it says warning, and then it's talking a little bit about the x-axis of the chart, but I can see the chart renders just fine. So typically if there's an error that pops up, but it's not actually affecting the prototype, don't have to worry about it. But just get rid of that. We can see that it added a new page for us. It added the chart, added the content that we see on the page here, as you described. But it also says, do you want me to continue with phase 2? Which is, let's see, adding basic filtering functionality, metrics and breakdowns, and so on. So again, with the kind of configuration that I have set up here, it breaks down the work into multiple chunks. And then I just have to keep saying yes. I just say, yeah, keep going, unless I decide to divert it in some other way.
That's a pretty good breaking of phases. That's I'm impressed by the way they just decompose that design into those pieces. They make a lot of sense. That's probably what I would have done too.
Yeah, and you definitely want to try to break stuff down. If you try to do everything in one request, it's much more likely that it's just all going to fall apart. So breaking it down into chunks is a good idea.
Just while this is loading, I guess like a question on what happened to get this, how this tool got to this point. Is it essentially that we have decades at this point of engineers making decisions with product managers, designers, et cetera, on phasing work, and these tools have internalized the heuristics for how to break things down into phases?
Yeah, great question. So this is actually part of the custom config I have set up. So if I go into settings over here, and then this knowledge tab, and then one more over into this global system prompt, these are instructions that I've given Bolt on how it should behave. So I'm telling Bolt, this is how I want you to work. So this is why, for example, if I have a PRD, or it writes me a PRD, that's why. And I always refer back to the PRD. So it's a combination, I think, of like the LLMs being able to do some basic planning, but also me giving instructions to the tool on how it should be working.
Got it. So did you have an explicit instruction that said phase 1 should be more focused on X, and then phase 2, 3, 4, et cetera, should be focused on Y?
No, I just gave it the instructions to break it up into phases, and then it decided what the phases were.
Got it. So it is doing quite a bit of heavy lifting of its own to determine how to define each phase.
Yeah, for sure. And you can see it's already changed a lot, right? So we have some new analytics, like whatever this card is down here, our updated content. I wonder if these actually work. No, not yet. But we'll continue along here. So I'm just going to say continue. I don't even really know what continue means at this point, but again,
phase 3, baby.
Phase 3. We'll see what happens here. Oh, it decided that deploying was the next thing, which fair enough. Maybe this is one of the downsides of not being specific, is it decided that deploying was the next step here.
That's because my expectation is it would have been, do you want to go to phase 3?
Yeah, definitely like being more specific is a good thing. That I think we rolled the dice on that one and it didn't work out, but that's okay. So why don't we use our approach again of saying something along the lines of what's the differences between the design and your implementation, and can you improve it? And we'll see what that does.
So Colin typed, can you improve your implementation, match the design exactly, make a plan, don't write any code.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking for it to come back with some content. Header section, chart improvements, discovery section, visual polish. I'm just going to say implement all of these in one go. The reason why is like it decided to break this up into multiple phases, because that's, again, how I have it set up. For like small visual changes, I don't really want it to go through 6 steps to get us there. So we'll just see where we land here. And again, we can keep going on this. I could keep trying to make it match more and more closely. I could give it the screenshot a second time and say, what's the differences? I could point out differences and say, hey, can you do this differently? Like there's lots of different approaches. Just for the sake of time, I'll probably pause.
Yeah, the baseline feels good enough. Like it feels like we've got a solid foundation to start building, because what we want to demonstrate is like how to build a net new or how to prototype a net new capability on top of an existing piece of real estate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we'll give this a second to wrap up. But this is what I was mentioning before. You could probably spend as much time as you feel like spending on trying to get the designs to match. If that's not important, then I would just minimize the time spent there.
It really does seem good enough to me. Like, I don't know if I'll even tell the difference at this point.
Colin, we need to get you like a text expander to have the make a plan. Don't write any code. Like, I feel you probably use that 200 times a day.
Yeah, exactly. Just basically like macros almost, right? But yeah. All right, well, give it a second to load here. We should be able to see one more time where we're at. Yeah, so cleaned up the chart a little bit and so on. Overall, let's just say we're happy with where we're at here.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So from here, we're going to say that we want to prototype a new feature. So let's say I want LinkedIn to recommend what I should do to improve my impressions. As you can see, my impressions are down 38% for the last 7 days. And so I want LinkedIn to tell me how I can improve my impressions. So I'm going to write a quick prompt to do that. Again, this is where the product thinking comes in. Like, ideally, you'd have decided what you want, and you're not just asking Bolt to come up with the idea and implement it for you. You're saying, like, I want this new feature. This is how it works. And then you're asking Bolt to prototype it. We're going to do a little bit of the latter, where I just say, this is the problem that I have. Can you implement a solution? And we'll see what it does. So let me just
theoretically, could you just copy and paste like a PRD into the chat?
Yeah, you could give that a try. You still want to like chunk down the implementation in terms of steps. So sometimes like you just want to make sure that you're not trying to implement the entire PRD in all in one go. But overall, that approach does work. And like I said, I have it write a PRD for me most of the time.
So another version of that question. Sorry, not trying to prevent you from getting into this.
Yeah,
once you submit that, I'll ask my question.
No, you can ask while I'm typing. I just try to think at the same time as talk. But anyway,
I am definitely not capable of doing that. I was going to ask, so one thing I use a lot is just like the native screenshot tools on my Mac. Just like Command-Shift-R, highlight the screen, and then I just throw a rectangle somewhere if I think there should be a button there, and I just put some text on that screenshot. And that's one really fast way of communicating to a designer or like a founder that I'm working with for like, hey, there should be a button here, like something like that does this. So my question is, at this point, if I took a screenshot of what we see in the preview and I just created a little rectangle in that top right corner, and it just had some text in the rectangle that was just like, suggest post for boosting impressions, could I drop that screenshot into Bolt and it would just add that button?
Oh yeah. You can definitely just mock up on top, or you can even start with like a hand-drawn style mock if you want and have that as your screenshot. But you could keep mocking on top of things and ask it to implement that way. Yeah.
All right. So while I've been annoying everyone with my commentary, what have we been doing here?
Yeah. What we did is I threw in a prompt I said, can you help me improve my impressions? I'd like to add a mock AI feature that recommends actions I can take. How would you do this? It came back with a plan. I asked it to implement the plan, and then we have our new code. And we can see now we have some AI-powered recommendations in terms of how I can improve my impressions on LinkedIn. So we can see post during peak hours, boost engagement with questions, expand my network, leverage trending topics, and post an achievement. Personal impressions or personal milestones get 3x more engagement, and so on. So I think this actually turned out a really nice example of, if you're the PM at LinkedIn and you have some ideas about, well, one, either you have an existing idea about what you want to add to this page, and this is like, you're trying to drive action, like you want users to use the platform more, which obviously LinkedIn has some incentives for that, then that's fine. Or I didn't even really have an idea about what I wanted here, and this is what I came up with, which honestly is pretty reasonable. So,
yeah, I think I'm impressed at multiple levels. I think the first one that I'm impressed is the fact that it thought about. So basically, we get 5 options, and it actually tells you the impact that they think the different options have, which I think it's like a really good product intuition there. I also think the copy for the header, the body, and the CTA are all really strong, right? There's social proof, there's data. The wild part too is that it's borrowing a lot of the things that LinkedIn already does, right? Like the copy and the tone. It's almost, I know I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, so I weirdly know what that looks like. So yeah, all in all, wow, this is pretty solid.
The decisions that it made, if you just break it down, is we're going to have a new section. We're going to have cards that each card represents an action. So there's going to be some CTA in every one of these cards. There's going to be an icon that goes with every one of these cards. We're going to have a header, and we're going to have body text. And then we're going to have this like pill / like label that describes the impact. And they've just managed to avoid very basic mistakes of using redundant words, using redundant calls to action. Yeah, this is incredibly impressive, actually.
Yeah, if I want to be picky, my only feedback is that right now they feel like mutually exclusive options, but actually you can combine a lot of them. So maybe that's like the feedback that I would give my designer, be like, can you actually find a way to maybe combine all of them? But or just like trying to make it so you can hit multiple of those recommendations at once. But yeah, I think mid-level designer, like I would be like, yeah, this is really solid. Like someone really senior, I would have maybe expected them to elevate the conversation a little bit more.
Yeah, and going back to what Colin, you were saying earlier, and I think the way that you really coach people to like think of how to use these tools is it's meant to get a right conversation going. It's a communication vehicle, right? So
Yeah.
this, I would be shocked if this does not get an interesting conversation going about this general idea, like within the people at LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. Again, you probably put yourself in the shoes of the PM here, right? So you talk to your design team about this idea, talk to customers, talk to your engineering team about the implementation of this idea, right? It's just a fantastic communication tool in terms of getting thoughts and feedback. And again, if you want to be like, someone comes up with something that's, oh no, the mutually exclusive thing, for example, is a great example. You just throw in another prompt, right? And you could either have a solution in mind or just say, I want this to look like these examples or these actions are not mutually exclusive. Can you find a way to make that look better? And maybe it does a decent job.
Yeah, the other could be, instead of going high, medium, low impact, I'd like to maybe describe the impact in terms of like how many more impressions do you think I could get? And then sort them by whatever's going to get me the most impressions, right? Like you could, but those are all optimizations on top of an entire pattern that just got created.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that's like the baseline idea here for this approach to AI prototyping. Again, this is all client side. There's no server or database, which is a good thing. We don't want those because it just increases the complexity of this idea. So when we're talking about prototyping new ideas for the purpose of communication, we want to stay away from servers and databases, focus just on UI, start with the screenshot, and then use some of the strategies we talked about today in terms of getting to this point here.
Do you guys mind if we get into a little bit of a tangent?
Please.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm just like putting myself in the shoes of the PM, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm actually a PM on LinkedIn, and I had this idea. It'd be really cool if we gave recommendations about how to improve your impressions. And then I just watched this awesome episode with these 3 handsome guys exploring AI tools. I'm like, cool, I'm going to do this. I ended up at this point. How do I bring this to the designer in a way that they're like, hey, you really stepped on my boundaries, like love the initiative, but this is my job. Like, how do you incorporate this in a way that's actually a productive conversation with designers without them feeling that you're like overstepping on their territory?
Yeah, I can take the first stab at that as well. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it doesn't match the design systems typically that we have. And so I think it's pretty easy to just communicate this as an expression of an idea rather than you're replacing this step there that involves the designer. Just because there's probably some work here that has to happen in terms of not only just like, I'm not talking about like, oh, it's not the right font, the overall patterns of what's happening here. And then the second part is there's one way to flip this, which is like, what if we had the designers doing the same thing? Then it's just like a really quick and easy way for everyone to communicate their ideas. It doesn't have to be just the PM. And then we still have that refinement step afterwards, but no one's offended by the idea that someone else is coming up with an idea. And I think that's honestly a sign of a good product team anyway. If your engineer comes to you and says, hey, I was talking to this customer or I saw this issue and this is a good idea, we should think about it. Ideally, the team is like responsive to that, and it's not like the PM gets upset about that either. So anyway, those are just my own thoughts, but yeah, curious.
Yeah, and I'll do some role playing because I've worked with designers that I would tell them this, and they'll be like, Mark, love the energy, love the initiative, but your job is to tell me, here's the problem that I want to solve, which in this case is like, hey, I don't know how to improve my impressions. Your job is to tell me, here are the pain points. Here's everything that I know about the customer. And then you pass the ball to me and you tell me, hey, like now based on your design knowledge, your experience, build the best solution. You like design team is responsible for the solution. Yeah. That's probably like, I've had, unfortunately, multiple conversations like that in my career, even with a lot simpler of me just going with like a piece of paper and like designs, basically.
So I'm happy to jump in because sure, it happens. It definitely happens. And I've been there. And what I would say is I suspect that dynamic is going to change in the coming years as these capabilities proliferate, because designers who get territorial in that way, I think, are going to start to get weeded out of companies. I think it's literally like an unnecessary slowing down function. If you imagine the role of the CEO of a company or the founder of a company is to like set the pace and move everyone as fast as possible. If there comes a point where designers or any other function are starting to just like bottleneck decision making because of getting offended or feeling like someone's stepping on their toes, I think those are going to start to like get weeded out as like slowing down functions. That's one thing I'm just like a forecaster, I guess, of what's going to happen. That said, I think one way I would personally present it if I was working with a very sensitive designer today is like, hey, I put together this terrible, it's awful, right? But I just needed to get it out of my head so that I could talk to you about it. And now that you've seen it, and I haven't shown this to anyone else yet, I would just like really love to get your take on how we could do something like this. We can completely throw this away, but they at least know what you're picturing. That's I think the most disarming way I would potentially put this out there. But I think the key is including the designer before you broadcast it more widely, because I find designers get very defensive if now they have to respond to something that if you put this out there and the CEO sees it and they're like, let's ship it, right? Now the designers, hold on.
Like, you cut me out from the equation. Yeah.
I just want to be part of the conversation. But Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I have like maybe a hot take on this one, and maybe I've just been lucky with the designers I've worked with. But in the past, when like I've worked with design, I'm decent enough at Figma that I can do some basic stuff myself. And there's times that I've done that where like my designers are booked with other stuff, and I just run it by them before we ship it. I'm like, does this make sense? Yep, looks good. I reuse the existing component systems that we have to do that, so it's not like random stuff. But ultimately, I think like the customer is the one who gets set aside. That's the whole point. And there's different like patterns. I'm not suggesting the customer is going to make the best design, but the point of this is to test, is this even a good idea at all? I think the minimum amount of time you can spend on that is the best thing you can do. So do we want AI-powered recommendations? Is the question that we're trying to answer, not is this the right design for AI-powered recommendations? And build it this way, test it with the customer, or if you see if it even makes any sense, talk to the engineering team. Is it even feasible to ship this? I mean, this is pretty basic, but one thing like that's not basic is this one says your audience is most active between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. If I was an engineer, I'm like, do we have analytics on each individual user's network's activity? Like, that seems complicated. So anyway, I think it's more so that part, like, than it is, this is the final design. And ideally, like, you know, the designers who are on your teams are receptive to that as well, that you want to ship the right things, and this is a quick way to get to there.
Yeah. So maybe in other words, another way to disarm the tensions could be, hey, I just put this together so that I can go talk to a few customers and just get reactions, but this is by no means something I'm proposing we ship as is. Engineering is not going to start working on it until we get strong validation that this is what customers want. And even once we get that, you and I, me, PM, you designer, we will spend a lot of time together making sure we come up with the right solution before we actually go to market with something.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And again, I'll just reiterate, in the current course, like I have designers here in the course. This isn't like a role-specific tool or approach, right? So your designers can do the exact same thing if they want to. And really, it's just about talking to customers sooner, more often, and expressing your ideas faster, I think is the kind of theme here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, right? I almost wonder if you become a better designer if you spend less time designing and more time talking to customers and actually like getting more data before you like finalize your designs almost. And I think that's maybe what these tools allow you, is that maybe before to come like with a prototype end to end, maybe it might take you like, I don't know, like a week and a half. Now with something like this, you can actually do it in 2 hours, which means that maybe you can spend 2 hours building this, 3 days testing, 2 more hours, 3 days testing, which then you end up with a design that's maybe 3x or 4x better.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there's also like, to some degree, a narrowing that has to happen. The first part is, do we want AI-powered prototypes or AI-powered recommendations in this context? And then after that, it's what are the relevant recommendations that actually drive value? And then after that, it's what is the design that pushes users to engage with those recommendations? And I think, or whatever the various checkpoints are along the way. And I think from the beginning to the end, you could use like this tool, AI prototyping the whole way, or you might switch back into Figma. That's honestly what I would probably do. You get this going, see if it makes any sense, test with customers, refine it. And then when you're ready to actually be like, yeah, okay, this is a good idea, get it back over into Figma, prototype it there. But then you're not like churning in Figma a lot. You just have an idea of what you want to ship from the get-go in Figma.
Yeah, what I like about this the most as just like an accelerator for getting customer signal is how every one of these elements, like if I were to follow the quote unquote traditional process of mocking up something like this before I show it to customers, the amount of decisions that need to be made, like I said earlier, is just there's so many decisions, and they might not be rocket science decisions, but they're decisions nonetheless. Like copy, I've seen copy completely stump customers in user interviews before because they're like, I actually don't know what this button means, or I don't know what this section means. And I'm like, oh, just ignore the copy. And they're like, how am I supposed to ignore the copy? I don't really know what it's saying. So I feel like the ability to get that signal and get the idea without having to make that many decisions. You made maybe what, like 10 decisions, like when we were building this? Continue, yes. Great, do this. I just feel like the cognitive load required for getting something that can get the conversation going is what I like the most about this, like the reduced cognitive load.
Yeah, on that trend, should we see how we could get feedback from customers and maybe like some of the analytics that we could connect to this prototype?
Yeah, for sure. What I also did ahead of time, part of my prep work, was setting up PostHog. So there's lots of different product analytics tools out there that you can use. But the cool thing about this is because we're in code, we're not in Figma, that means that you can use any tool that connects to an application, connects to code. So if you're using Pendo or Hotjar or PostHog for product analytics or whatever tools, like whatever product tools or analytics tools you like, you can set them up on the prototype as well. And so what we can do is we can look at, for example, some basic activity logs. Like, I have logs over here. You can see like people clicking around, right, inside of my prototype, what they're clicking on. We can also look at session replays. So this is probably like the most valuable part, is we can actually watch as people interact with that prototype. So this one was from 2 hours ago. These are like me doing a little bit of prep work, clicking around. We should get new ones loading in. It just takes a little bit of time based on the one that we just went through. But you can actually just share this out ahead of time, like just give the link to a customer and then watch them interact with that prototype. You don't necessarily have to sit with them and see them like test or click through the Figma. You can just give them the link and see what they do.
This is really cool. And just maybe some context for the people that are just listening. So right now we're basically looking at PostHog, which is like a analytics platform. And I'm guessing what happened before Colin got into the call with us, he basically added some code to add that tracker into the app. And you have all these different analytics and logs that you can see from people click, but also you have a recording of watching people interact with the app, what they're clicking, how much time they're spending on different pages, which is really powerful. I think you really get a sense of what's clear, what's not, what draws people attention.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost a step further than your Figma stuff, obviously. Like you can, there is tools, I think, for this for Figma as well, like external tools you can set up. But the nice part is this is all free. You probably already have a product analytics stack at work, so you can just integrate your existing one, grab the session recordings, grab the analytics, share it out, see what people are doing. And yeah, it's super simple to set up as well because it's, you can use the AI. You just basically ask it to set up a PostHog for you, and it does all the work of setting it up. You don't have to really do anything. Yeah.
So I just love getting into the tactics of this. Sure. So let's say I'm that PM on LinkedIn and I want to actually see how a couple of maybe customers interact with the app that we just built. What do you recommend the workflow of that to be? Like, do you recommend sending the link and then we play with this and we'll look at the analytics, or do you recommend actually like getting into a call with them and seeing how they interact with it, combination of the two? Like, what have you seen work best in this world?
I guess it's a preference thing as well. I like to talk to customers, especially early on, just because I don't think like watching a recording really replaces the ability for you to be like they're like, oh, this just doesn't make sense, or I don't know. They'll give you very like much clearer feedback than what you get from a recording. So again, I approach it the same way, like that narrowing idea where maybe you start off with talking to customers with that quick idea. And then as you continue to refine, maybe you send out 2 or 3 different prototypes and you set up recordings on all of them. And you can watch which ones work better, which ones don't, like where you're just getting frustrated. You can observe that at a higher scale than one-on-one interviews. You could obviously continue to conduct one-on-one interviews if you want to. But I think you have more options, but I wouldn't start with the recordings personally. I'd start with the conversations and then narrow down into the recordings afterwards.
Yeah, the other thing I'm thinking through is kind of the meta impact of some of these tools on just like teams and how they work. So we talked a little bit about the designer dynamic maybe for PMs. But Colin, are you starting to see, and feel free to stop screen sharing if you want. I think that was an awesome demo as we just start to wrap up here. But are you seeing anything that's really surprising to you maybe so far from the people that you're coaching and teaching these new tools to, for like how they end up, like the impact that it has on their life or their job? Just curious if anything unexpected is popping up.
I think one thing that I was surprised by is that most people are more interested in building their own software than they are prototyping software at work. That has been a common theme. I walked through that workflow with you, and I think to me, it seems the value seems fairly obvious. Like having been doing product work for a while, the idea of prototyping an idea like that in a couple minutes, testing that idea seems pretty useful. Almost everyone is like, yeah, that seems cool, but can I ship my own SaaS? And so I think there's actually way more people, and this is across roles. This isn't specifically to product. There's way more people than I thought who are interested in building their own products, and they just didn't have the ability to before. Like they just didn't feel like they could. So yeah, that was a surprising thing because the course is not focused on that, but that's like the most common kind of like question I get. It's also obviously harder than when doing what we just did. It takes more knowledge and skill. But yeah.
My hypothesis for explaining that could potentially be something like, hey, you've just showed me a tool that allows me to move faster and do more with less. Do I want to potentially use that for my own things to accelerate progress where I don't have large budgets and a lot of resources? Or do I want to use this to move faster within an environment that already has resources and like existing processes? And so people are probably seeing like a faster path to value by doing it for side projects, perhaps. What do you
I'm
think,
guessing
Mark?
too the part there is that at work you already have engineers and designers, right? And that you're not paying. But if you want to do your own startup, like it's either you use one of these tools or you hire a team of developers or designers, which is a lot more expensive, which also just creates the friction of even getting started on the first place. But I think like to me, I just see them so connected, right? It's almost like the first unlock is you start using this at work. So instead of spending maybe 40 hours working, you spend 20 hours. Maybe you don't tell people that you're using these tools so that how much time it's saving. Then you free up this time and you start using these tools to build your own house. But almost like, to me, the sequencing should always be like, hey, how can I free up some of my time so then I can start working on my side thing? And then only once I have that side thing getting enough momentum, that's then when I can take the leap and fully go all in if I want to. But I just see them so connected, and I think that's what's so exciting about them.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to ask, let's play that out, Mark. Do you think in a world where, like, I don't know, in a year, maybe 2 years at the latest, if not sooner, it's going to become pretty ubiquitous. Like people using these tools is going to become ubiquitous. In Colin's world, it might already be ubiquitous because you live and breathe this stuff. But I think there's still a bunch of people that would watch this demo that we just did and be like, whoa, I didn't know you could do that, right? And that I think the percentage of the people in our field who will feel that way is going to get smaller and smaller. So like more and more people are going to get more and more comfortable with stuff. So in a year or two, are people really going to be able to like save time or free up time by using these tools, or will they just get busier and busier because the expectation is that they should be able to do more and more because these tools have made them more and more efficient? Like you can do more with less. So we're paying you for 40, 50 hours a week, full-time job. So why are you only producing 6 prototypes this week? You should be producing 10 or 12. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's a philosophy question, but I'm wondering how that plays out.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's two. So the way I would think about it, there's 2 parts. The first part is what type of company do you work for? I think there's going to be some companies that are like very AI native and they know, hey, here's all the things that you can do. And those companies, I think there's going to be the expectation of, because you have this tool and you can use them and we're paying for them, we expect a lot more from your output, right? And I think pulling that off, I actually think the people that work for those companies are actually going to have less time to do side projects because they're just going to be like that bottleneck that to actually get things done. So I think but I still think there's going to be all these like all these PMs that join either larger companies that maybe their transformation is going a bit slower, or companies that need to go through a digital transformation that were brick and mortar that now have a technology strategy. And I think those are the ones that they're going to be really going in circles across other departments that are maybe not using this technology. And I think, at the end of the day too, the other kind of way that I think about this is that a lot of these tools allow you to move faster, save time, but this is only really useful if then like where to invest your time in the highest ROI thing, and also how do you sequence things, right? Like, cool, I just take the example that we just went through today, right? There's a path where a PM goes through this and they just like, cool, this is good enough, let's ship it. There's another PM which actually builds this prototype, talks to 3 customers, goes back, modifies it, talks to 3 more customers, right? And I think that PM is going to be working harder, but also I think the outcome that they'll deliver is a lot better because, yeah, they've talked to more customers and their product is way more refined. So anyways, that was a long rant, but there's just some thoughts on the topic. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, I agree. I think to be honest, it's more so like taking away some of the busy work and getting you to the part that's valuable, which is talking to customers faster. And then a lot of this has to do with kind of going back to the beginning of our discussion, like taste. Like if you worked at Linear, for example, which again is like a Jira alternative for people who aren't familiar, they have a very strong culture around taste. And they might spend way more time on some simple interaction than another company who just says like, yeah, let's just ship it. It's good enough. I think company culture plays a big role in like how people end up using these tools and what good enough looks like as a result. But there's one other thing I wanted to add here, which is some people from this point think like, oh, cool, now that I can get the code part, I'm going to go build my own SaaS. I'm going to build my own product and ship it and make a bunch of money or whatever. And the funny thing is that like the thing I like to say here is there's a reason why like every software engineer isn't also running their own SaaS product at the same time. And we all know this in like inherently working in product, like there's a lot of other problems to solve, like distribution and getting customers to care about the thing you're shipping and all that other stuff. For a lot of people, I think the technical barriers felt like the biggest barrier, but it's actually just the first barrier. And then you have the sequence of barriers after that. And so anyway, that's not me trying to discourage people from doing it, but just to say that like it's still the same amount of like difficulty to win. You can just try more things faster, but it doesn't really change the game itself.
Yeah. And the one thing I want to add quickly to that is that we should probably do a part 2 podcast of just like, because I think we're still making it sound very easy that you can go in and build an idea, but for anyone that has spent enough time using these tools, like it's not that simple. Yeah. Colin made it look very easy, but like you might watch his videos, like I can build like my to-do app in 1 hour. Like I've never shipped something for less than 10 hours and a lot of frustration and debugging. So it's also not even that easy today. But yeah, I totally agree with the different frontiers. Sorry, Ben, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that, first of all, thank you so much for coming on, Colin. This was awesome. And what I'm just thinking about is like where the puck is going. And obviously things are moving so fast that it's almost impossible to imagine what things are going to be, or what the status quo is going to be in a year. But what seems obvious to me that is definitely going to happen is that just the accessibility of these tools and the speed of going from idea to working product or working prototype is going to get easier and easier and faster. And ultimately, at some point, you'll have an idea and you'll have a dope product you could put in people's hands that day. And that's definitely where things are going. And in that world, I really do think that what's going to differentiate people, I mean, we call it distribution, but I think Colin's talked about it a couple times on this episode that I would really double click into, which is like talking to users and talking to customers and just building those relationships is going to become almost like everything. That will become the moat. That will become why someone chooses Colin's product over Marc's product over Ben's product, is because something about Colin resonates more. Everything else has the same features, so I'll go with Colin's product. And so my advice to anyone that's listening, that's kind of almost like trying to future-proof their skills, is make sure you don't over-index on building things and under-index on talking to customers. If anything, I would do what Colin's advising, which is spend the minimum amount of time hacking together your ideas so that you can maximize the amount of time you spend talking to customers. That seems like the right advice to take away, or at least that's one takeaway I have, Colin, from what you shared with us. Yeah,
100% agree. Marc's right. Like it can definitely be challenging to get it to work. I think I probably did make it look a little bit maybe too easy even. It's a little bit disingenuous, but but you can get past that part. You can get better at it. You can get past that part. And then once you're past that part, then what you just said is the more relevant component. Like everyone gets to the same skill baseline. If you probably spend 20 hours doing it, you learn a couple of tips here and there, you'll be fine. And then making the right decisions is the important part after that. So
because stuff's going to get so commoditized, which is like, why do you buy this peanut butter brand versus that peanut butter brand? People will at some point make irrational decisions on which product they want. So anyway, Colin, thank you for being on. Before we wrap, 2 final questions for you. One,
sure.
Where can people learn more about what Colin Matthews is up to? And then second is, how can people potentially be helpful to you?
Yeah, I'll learn more probably on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. I post a couple times a week there. If you're curious about AI prototyping, that's mostly what I'm talking about right now. So there's some tips and tricks, best practices, that kind of good stuff in there if you want. If you're looking to like get started in this space and maybe you feel like it's a little intimidating or you tried to do it yourself and everything falls apart, I do teach a course on this as well over on Maven. So you can pick that up if you want and come join a cohort of your peers and build a bunch of stuff. That's actually one of the coolest parts, to be honest. And it was something that was unexpected is everyone just constantly submitting stuff that they built in the channels. And it's just so cool to see like, all of these different things, all these different ideas people had and what they're building, like pushing the idea of what's possible. So that's one of the benefits of the course or the cohort that honestly has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the people who decide to join up. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I have a Substack as well. You can check that out if you're interested. Post twice a week on there. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Amazing.
We'll link to all that in the episode notes.
Yeah, this has been incredible. I'm excited to go play with all these tools. And yeah, I think people will find it really useful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.